exam.
Yeah, just like it, is it?
Yeah, I started getting anxiety. I'm like, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way?
You bring your Scantron, your number 2 pencil.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to those of you participating here in the webinar. Welcome to those of you on Social Media Live. We thank you for being part of our closing event for the Symposium Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage, put forth by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI, at California State University, Fresno. A little bit of a background: the symposium first began in 1990, so none of these people were born, and it ended in 2002. And so the symposium lasted for 12 years. Actually, today, between 2 and 4, I should say, we had a little bit of a reminiscing event that was on Facebook Live as well, where we had some of the original writers and poets and artists, musicians who were part of the original event visit us from different parts, from the Azores, mainland Portugal, the east coast of the United States, Canada, etc. And so we decided that we would bring back the Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage. It started in Tulare in 1990. For those of you who don't know, Tulare is a small community in the central San Joaquin Valley, now of about 75,000 people, at that time of about 40. We got a lot of flack from people in other parts of the state and a lot of parts of the country said, why are you putting a literary event? Because Tulare is known for cows and cows and cows. But, people who are in ag also read books and also, go to concerts and also like Taylor's comedy. And so it was a challenge. It was a challenge because it was something the community, whether it was put in Tulare or San Jose or San Diego or anywhere else, it was something the community was not used to, which is a literary symposium. And we put it together. It was a project for 10 years. We ended up doing it for 12 with the government help from the Azores, FLAD, Luso American Development Foundation. We have Miguel Vaz, the director, on with us as an attendee, and FLAD was a sponsor for all 12 years. And so we had and a lot of community help as well. Here we are, fast forward 19 years later, and after 2002, and we put together a different symposium, a 21st century symposium. It was all virtual. We hope that next year it won't be all virtual, it'll be a combination of both at Fresno State. And we were hoping that the symposium with the 21st century theme will be something that will continue for many years as a way to bring the arts from the Azores. The symposium is dedicated to the Azores. That's why, we asked that all of the participants here were folks that have ties to the Azores. So it's basically very Azorean centric. So I'll already tell you that, as you all know. It's about the Azores. The theme for this year and as we ended, it was called the Azores and its diaspora in the United States. And why the word diaspora, not the word communities? Because communities sometimes in Portugal and throughout, people think of someone who, you go out to work to make money and to send back to your homeland, and you're basically just someone working outside of your community. The word diaspora has a lot of connotations, as we all know, even biblical, and it's a living community. It exists, beyond one generation. It goes into second, third, and fourth generation, and all of you are a product of that first or second generation. And so, even though it may have been your parents or your grandparents who immigrated, all of you still have connection to those islands and to the Azorean community and the Portuguese community in general in the United States. So thank you all for joining us. Instead of having some stuffy speeches that traditionally that's how you end a symposium, you have a bunch of people talk about, from this government office or this office of culture or of any kind of a political world. We decided it was best to bring in what we've tried to do all along, young people, and give them a voice and listen to what the community can be 10, 15 years from now. So I'm going to go around and ask each and every one of you to do a brief intro, if you will, please. Tell us your name and, of course, tell us your name and tell us your connection to the Azores, and that will be just like a kind of a basic intro, and then we'll talk about some of the themes that we thought it'd be interesting to talk for the next 40 minutes or so. Okay, so we'll start with we'll start locally here. How about with Vivian Santos from Hanford, California?
Hi guys. So my name is Vivian Santos, and Yeah, I'm only about 30 minutes away from Tulare, in a little town called Hanford. And um, yeah, my connections to the Azores. Um, my entire family, I guess. My parents immigrated from there. My dad's from Angra, my mom's from Quatro Velhas, from the island of Terceira. My grandma, my grandparents immigrated from there as well. Actually, before my dad, because my dad was in the army, so he stayed behind and showed up a few years later. Um, and yeah, I still have family there. My grandma is there. She's been back there for a few years, and a couple of uncles and cousins and all that. So that's my connection.
Thank you. And Anthony.
There's the unmute button.
Mhm.
I am Anthony Steves. I am a podcaster. I have two shows I'm a part of. One is my solo podcast, which is based on a true journey, where I discuss certain moments in history, whether it be a person or an event, and tell it to you in a narrative sort of storytelling. One, of course, the first episode was about Aristides Suzamenes, which was so graciously aired on the Portuguese American Hour. And I have some plans for future stories and with another positive character named Peter Francisco, and a not so positive character named Joseph Barboza, who was a hired hitman for the East Coast mafia in New England. So both sides of the coin with that one. I am also part of a crew of podcasters called the Capeless Crusaders, where we talk about everything comic book related, whether it's movies, TV shows, the comic books themselves, the writers, what's new, what's coming, what we like, what we don't like. Been doing that for about 7 years now. So those are the two things I do. And I also write for the entertainment website Latino Media Review. And we discuss all things in film and television.
Fantastic. Thank you. And your connection to the Azores, Anthony.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
My parents, it is an Azores themed, right? Besides my handle being the Azorean one on social media,
That's right.
my mother and father both are from Terceira. My dad is from Altaj, and my mother was from San Bartolomeu.
Well, Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Clemente. I'm 19 years old and I'm a sophomore at the University of Virginia. And my mother she was born in San Miguel, St. Michael, in Villa Franca. And then when she was 11 years old, she and her 4 siblings and my grandparents immigrated to Somerville, Massachusetts. And so growing up, I was around all of my Portuguese family and was able to listen to Portuguese and eat Portuguese food and go to local restaurants, including Azorean specific restaurants. And I've also been back to San Miguel. I've visited 3 times and it's really beautiful and I love it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. And how about Paulo?
Thank you. So my name is Paul Salguero. My family's from the Azores as well. My mother's from San Miguel, or as we like to say, Some God. That's where she's from, a freguesia de Covoada, and my father's from Terceira, Praia da Victoria. So I've been pretty involved in Portuguese community here on the East Coast, master's degree in criminal justice, and I also run, a couple YouTube channels and a Portuguese comedic Facebook page as well. So, but yeah, that's my connection. Mostly, I've been to the Azores and the mainland. So I've been to St. Michael probably 3-4 times. So I still have a bunch of family there. My family immigrated in the late 70s to the US, to Rhode Island, and then we moved to Massachusetts. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. And Sabrina.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sabrina Broome, born and raised in Rhode Island. My father immigrated in 1990 from San Miguel, Pic de Pedra, and my mother's parents immigrated in the early 70s from Aguadpa, also in San Miguel. I just moved back from Lisbon. I was at Universidade Católica getting my master's degree. So I've been traveling back and forth from Azores probably for the last 4 or 5 years. We still have a house there, so I'm very, very connected to my Azorean heritage as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sabrina. Taylor.
Yeah, hi, my name is Taylor Amarant. Both of my parents immigrated from San Jorge. They were actually from Freguesias, maybe like 5 minutes from each other, but did not meet until they got to California at a festa, of course. Um, let's see. Growing up, my connection to being Azorean, I played in the Portuguese marching band for a decade alongside my brother. My father was the president of St. Anthony. We were involved in the Santa Clara Sister Cities program. I got to be an exchange student. I got to be in Coimbra, Portugal for some time and developed some great friendships actually. Yeah, myself, I am a Portuguese stand-up comedian. I also, my job is I work in sports broadcasting. So I hosted a program on NBC Sports Bay Area most recently, and I'm the San Jose Earthquakes in Stadium show host. But yeah, very Portuguese, love my roots. Azores first, Portugal second, but all grouped under the same umbrella. Yeah, proud to be Portuguese and happy to be here.
I like the Azores first. That's a good thought. And Ashley.
Hello, my name is Ashley Fergundis. I'm originally from Atwater, but I've lived in Fresno for the past 17 years. I work at California State University, Fresno, which is how I got connected with Denise and this project, and I'm proud to be a part of it. My connection to the Azores, my father's family is from St. George and my mom's family is from Chiseda. And I must admit right off the bat, I'm quite jealous of Sabrina that she has got to go there so many times. I have been back there, but it's been about 20 years since I've been back. So would love to plan another trip once we're allowed to travel again.
Indeed, thank you. And it's a good thing. We're kind of divided. We have, 3 from San Miguel. We have a couple, 2.5 from Terceira and 1.5 from San Jorge. I mean, that's a pretty good division of the archipelago. So at least we have basically 3 of the 9 islands represented. So thank you all for taking time. And my first thought that I'd like you share with us is, first of all, although all of you were born here, as you mentioned, and you're all of you, your parents, or in some cases, even if one of the parent was born here, the other came from there. And so my first question is, although you are an American citizen and born in the United States and raised here, do you still consider yourself an Azorean? And if you do, why? Paulo.
Yeah, first and foremost, I forgot, since I got a message during this, a shout out to my parents and Senator Michael Rogers that are watching right now. So they wanted to make sure I got that plug in.
I know. I just got the same message as Senator Michael was on there, so I'm going to try to get him on with us in a little bit.
So shout out to them. So I do consider myself Azorian. I grew up pretty much Azorian. I always say I'm probably the most Azorian person you'll meet that's ever born in America. I grew up with everything, whether it be the music, the feasts, the food, it was everything. And then when I got to visit for the first time to San Miguel, I just felt at home, to be honest, and it's, I couldn't even describe that feeling except it was that, it was just felt at home, having the opportunity to see the house that my great grandparents lived in, and the floor that that was made from their hands, and just growing up with it, I just feel Azorian, and I think there's a pride to it, and we do have some great malasadas too. So can't go wrong with umas malasadas. But yeah, that's I do consider myself Azorian because of how I was brought up, and the lessons that my parents instilled in me. I think it came from their upbringing as well. So yeah.
And Sabrina, of course, your extensive travels and being doing a master's at Católica. So, but you have that connection, of course, with mainland Portugal. Through, of course, your studies and other projects as well. But do you consider yourself an Azorean? And if so, why? What elements kind of define you as an Azorean in your own perspective?
Yeah, so I identify as Azorian American, and I only do that because depending on where I am, I get a different title. So in the US, and this is something that I think everyone here can relate to, In the US, everyone always called me Portuguese. Then I would go to Azores with my family. And as soon as I got there, I was Americana. Americana já chegou para a festa. That's what they always used to say. And then funny enough, when I moved to Lisbon and I would, start speaking to professors or my colleagues, and I would tell them that I was from the US, they would say, well, no, that's not right. You speak Portuguese very well. And I said, oh, my family's from Azores. And they said, oh, that's what it is. You're Azorean. So I guess it just depends on where you are, how you identify. But I always say that I'm Azorean American because I really have this, I have both cultures inside of me. So.
Indeed. And Amanda, the same thing. Do you still consider as an American, as Sabrina put it very well, because that's first and foremost what you are. But do you consider yourself still Azorian? And what kind of defines that aspect of Azorian in your thoughts for you?
Like Sabrina said, when people ask, I usually say Portuguese American because if they know Portugal, they usually don't know about the Azores. But then if they're like interested, I'll explain that I'm from the islands of Portugal. And I think that they're so beautiful, and it's an underappreciated part of like Portuguese heritage, is being Azorean. And growing up, my grandmother and my aunt, my family, they lived like with me. And so I got the Azorean experience of being Portuguese. And I also, just when I went back to the islands, I felt like really accepted and at home, and everyone just like was so excited. So I felt like pride in sharing after I visited for the first time, sharing specifically that I'm Azorean from the islands of Portugal.
Fantastic. And Vivian, same question. As an American, do you still consider yourself part Azorian? And what features define that, if so?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think we're all here because we still identify as, Azorean. And for many reasons. One, I've also been back 5 times. I was supposed to go for a 6th time last summer, and we all know that got canceled. So hopefully next year, beginning of next year, I get to go again. But just so many things. I mean, I've been in Lesser Carnival since I was 6 years old, every single year, sang in them. I was Mestre de Varinha, Mestre de Pandeiro for many, many years. On top of that, I've been in folklore. I've sang músicas regionais, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I am a music teacher, so I will probably be talking about music a ton. I sing fado, which I know is continent, but I started getting interested in fado was the 4th time that I went to Terceira, and it was there that I started becoming interested in fado. So I do connect it to the Azores a little bit, and it's becoming a big thing there too now. Yeah, I'm part of a committee here for the St. John's Hall. My husband, who's also Azorean, his family's from São Jorge though, was president of that hall for like 6 years or something like that. And so, which, Ashley, you live in Fresno, we're having a fish fry dinner. Just kidding. If you want to support.
Yes, definitely.
And then, just growing up in my teenage years when we weren't allowed to do anything else because our parents were so, strict, we went to festas because that was fun, and at least we got to dance and hang out with friends there. And that's how we spent many of our summers. So definitely that's how I am still connected to being Azorean.
Indeed. And Taylor, same thing. Consider yourself still an American with lots of Azorianness in you, and what elements, what things make that Azorian part?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the interesting thing with us is that we have a home. We've always had a home in São Jorge to go to. We've now purchased additional property, and as a family have spent time updating, remodeling the property, making it like a second home. And prior to COVID, my parents especially would spend a longer period of time there, and then we would go in the summers, mostly every summer, and if not, then every other summer for sure. And then the fact that we still have a lot of family there, a lot of friends there and in Portugal really kind of keeps you feeling like you're as half and half as you could be, even though you were born here on this planet. You know, it's funny because if you think about it, the way you're raised, it doesn't really matter where you live, if you're raised a certain way within the walls of your home. And a lot of Portuguese people I know, they might be raised in these metropolitan areas with all these different things going on. But when you peel back all of that, the substance of how they were raised is really traditional, at times conservative-ish Portuguese, with, you know, the meals, the stories, the theories, if you will, the ideas of Azorean people. So yeah, it's a struggle, man. I feel like I have the best of both worlds, and I don't know if I'd have it any other way, to be honest.
Indeed, and there's a lot of common themes that we will explore in a little bit on both of you, on all of you. Ashley, your thoughts on that? Especially you haven't been there in 20 years, which is a while, but you know, and that's something we'll tackle a little bit later on, because not everybody can go to the Azores multiple times, you know, and a year or even every year or every 2 or 3 years. So, but how do you still consider yourself, although your parents immigrated, you still consider yourself an American, but with Azoreanness in it?
Yes, definitely. Kind of echoing what Vivian had mentioned, you know, I grew up dancing folklore as a little girl and hated it, right? You were so mad that that's how you had to spend that evening. And now I look back and truly appreciate it, right? Grew up on the Festa circuit, whether it was, you know, carrying a flag, a basket of flowers, or wearing a crown and a cape, like did the whole thing. It's in my blood. My family, you know, we had matanzas. I learned how to cook a lot of the traditional food. My friend and I actually, we have a festa every year still, where we just cook traditional sopas and have people over. And it would have been our 11th year last year, but we couldn't do it because of COVID. But definitely still in my blood, still proud to be Azorean. You know, there's things where I wish that I would have learned, you know, earlier in life, but happy that I do have that, and definitely trying to kind of show that to, you know, my son, and getting him comfortable with his culture and his heritage and stuff. So, but would definitely still consider myself Azorean, and I'm going to go back. It's going to happen soon.
I hope so. Anthony, the same thing.
Yeah, growing up, so before my first ever trip to Terceira in 2000, growing up, it was always, I'm Portuguese, and then I'd say my family's from Terceira. And throughout the festas, being a part of the festas and being involved in that, it was always, you know, Portuguese from Terceira. And after the first trip, I was like, no, I'm Azorean. I'm Azorean, because we were there for like, we did 4 weeks, 2 weeks in Terceira, 2 weeks in Portugal. And Portugal just felt like another America. Like, it wasn't too different from here, besides, you know, speaking primarily Portuguese. Terceira was like, kick back. There's some sort of tasca at one of the freguesias somewhere that you'd go to. It was either during Praia or São Joaninhos, depended on the month we were there. So there's always something going on at night, but otherwise it was just taking in the beauty of the island. And it was just felt like a connection to being Azorean. And like, I know when I got back, I said, no, I'm Azorean. And when people would ask, what's that? Well, let me tell you. And I would explain the Azores to them, because I wanted to basically say, hey, yes, I'm Portuguese, but my family's from these islands, and I want to tell you about these islands that are a part of Portugal. You know, as I would call it, Portuguese Hawaii sometimes. But yeah, that's kind of when I started saying, no, I'm an Azorean American.
Indeed, and it doesn't. We just had that discussion with one of the panels today. It doesn't take anything away from Portugal saying that you're an Azorean. It actually adds to it, and we're trying to convince the diplomatic people about that. You know, when you have diplomats from consuls to ambassadors, that adding the Azores to Portugal is adding more to what Portugal is all about, because it gives Portugal an added advantage in the middle of the Atlantic, much closer to the to the US and to the American continent. So the Azores only add to Portugal; they don't take anything away from it. I'm going to based on some of the themes that I heard here. You know, you're all very privileged in the aspect that you've been to the Azores. You've been there, some of you, probably every single year for many years, and some of you, 5, 6 times. That's a lot considered when you look at a lot of Azorean Americans, and especially those who are of second, third, and even fourth generation. And so that's where I'd like to kind of channel the conversation now to. How do we reach folks that don't have the contact with the Azores that you do? How do we get to second, third, and even fourth generations? Okay, how do we get to folks that it wasn't their parents that immigrated? It was their grandparents, great grandparents, or even great great grandparents who immigrated, but they still feel Azorean. I mean, I've told this story a few times about the student I've had many years ago that introduced himself in one of my Portuguese language classes, and his name was Garabowski, John Garabowski. I'll never forget John's name as long as I live. And he said, I asked him, because it's one of the things that you do in a language class, why are you taking the class? Because, people take it for different reasons, and not everybody because they want to learn Portuguese or because they want to have a better Portuguese. Most of my students right now in Fresno State are not Portuguese. I have a class, one of the classes, I have 14 students. I only have 2 Portuguese. And so the other 12 are not Portuguese. They're Hispanics learning a third language, or they're other ethnicities, but just thought it would be cool to learn Portuguese. And some of them, because of other reasons. And so John introduced himself and he said this: I'm John Garabowski. I'll never forget. And I'm taking Portuguese because I'm an Azorean. And I said, and that was one of the first times I heard a young person say Azorean. This is about 20 years ago. And I said to him, oh yeah, we have a lot of Garabowskis in the Azores. They're all over all the other islands. Everybody, there's at least, I know like 20 Garabowskis. And he, kind of, being ironic and funny with him. And he understood, which was good, because sometimes folks don't, as the comedians might know, sometimes you make a joke and people don't get it. And you say, wow, but he did. That never happens to Taylor or Paulo. And I said, he did. And he said to me, I said, I'm being facetious, but how do you consider yourself an Azorean? And he said this exact word, and I'll quote: my vó velhinha, because you couldn't say velhinha with a LH like a lot of Azorean Americans. He said, my vó velhinha was from São Jorge. And, so it was his great grandmother, okay, who, by the way, came as a young child or as a young person at the age of 17, I found out later, and married someone who was not Portuguese. And then his father's side is Polish and German and everything else. So he's like, what, not even a quarter Portuguese, basically. And he identified himself as an Azorean. I'm an Azorean. My vó velhinha came from São Jorge. And so how do we reach these folks? They still consider themselves Azoreans. They don't speak the language. I know all of you speak it one way or another, some better than others, obviously. They don't speak Portuguese. They don't have the connections. Lots of them have never gone back. Their parents have never gone there, but they feel a sense of connection. How do we reach these folks? Some of them don't go to festas. If they go to festas, they wouldn't understand the dance of the carnaval, or they wouldn't understand some of the things, some of the events. Their world is totally an American world and an English-speaking world. But they are the majority of us, because in California, there's 350,000 according to the census, and only 33,000 say they still speak Portuguese. So there's about 300 and almost 20,000 who consider themselves Portuguese, but don't have any knowledge of the language and have probably never gone back to the Azores or mainland Portugal, if that's where their families are from. And I know it's a $64,000 question, but I'll start with Taylor on that. So how do we connect with second, third, and fourth generations? How do we take the culture to them?
Wow, right out the gates. So I've always had a couple of ideas. I've always thought that one thing that I realized a few years ago is a friend of mine did their like genealogy thing. They went on like 23andMe or something, and found out they had 13% Portuguese, right? Not necessarily a guy that I was hoping would be crowned Portuguese, but nonetheless, the results came back. Anyway, what I realized was this. I thought, there's empty space here where these websites, and I've never done one of those tests, and I'll tell you why I've never done one, because I don't want it to tell me I'm less Portuguese than I feel like I am. I don't want to be labeled 78% Portuguese. Like, no, that's I'm not going to settle. But I always thought that if there was a way, once people find out what percentage they are of their different heritage or their ethnic group, if there was a way to then connect those people straight away from those sites with local organizations near you, like that are also of this ethnic group, etc. Like, hey, you're 70% Portuguese. Click here and find out what Portuguese people in your area are up to, and or meet so and so. Maybe you're single. And then you can like click on it and it takes you to like a Portuguese singles group on a social media site. I don't know. But I've always thought that was a way to recruit without recruiting. And by recruiting, I mean bringing people and kind of exposing them to some of our events and some of our groups. Another quick thing, I don't want to take up too much time, but another quick thing I always thought, when you're introducing somebody to something like an ethnic group that maybe it's not their dominant group, or maybe they're not as versed on what we do, etc. I think getting them to things in small doses really works, because you don't have to take them to the matança de porco. They don't have to see the pig bleeding like from the roof on day one. But you can take them to some of these events like a heritage night game, where it's, you know, a popular pastime here in the US, but it's sprinkled with some pieces of heritage, right? Because that's easier for someone to kind of take in. And then if they gravitate toward that, that's how you can kind of softly approach getting people more involved, and then talking about taking them to more things, getting them on these boards, getting their kids involved, language school, etc. There's a lot of opportunity, but I think that's a couple of ideas that I thought would really work.
That's a super idea on the 23andMe or whatever, any of those sites to connect, you know, with Portuguese. Thank you. That's a great idea, and again, also a great idea to connect first with someone who's of second or third or fourth generation to something that's mainstream, which is something we'll talk about. I think we do need more mainstream activities, because if you do take them to a matança de porco with a pig hanging, they'll never go back. They'll definitely take away from being Portuguese ever again. They'll say, no, this is maybe my great grandfather was this culture, but I'm not. And so that's the two great points. Amanda, in your thoughts, how do we get, you know, and I'm sure you have some friends who may be of Portuguese background, Azorean background, Azorean connection, but it wasn't their parents, like in your case, or their grandparents, may have been their great or their great great grandparents. And so how do we get them involved and aware?
I think the important thing to begin with is for Azorean Americans who are currently connected with their heritage to make that different distinction between I'm Portuguese with saying that I'm Azorean. So then people that they come in contact with, if they're unfamiliar with that, can like ask more. And I don't use Instagram anymore. I'm not really on social media that much, but when I went to the Azores, I posted that like I was in the Azores and like videos and stuff, and I saved it. And then when I went to college at UVA, I met some new friends and they followed me, and you can like click on highlights. And this one girl was like, oh my gosh, you're from the Azores? I was like, well, my mom is. And she said, oh, my grandmother or grandfather is from one of the biggest islands, I forget. And I was like, San Miguel? And she's like, oh my gosh, yeah. And so that just like sparked a conversation. She didn't really know that much about the Azores, and so I sent her like more videos and pictures. And my mom is a part of Palcus, and so I sent her like the Palcus link just if she wanted to, you know, see. So I think that is one way, using social media to reach out to younger kids like my age is good. Also, if for kids that are like learning Portuguese, I don't know if there's many programs like this, but having like virtual pen pals for like younger kids or even kids my age with students in the Azores. And I mean, writing letters is kind of dated a little bit, but having like monthly Zoom calls where I could be speaking to them in Portuguese and they could respond in English if they're learning English, and just having little fun dialogues like that, I think would help too.
Wonderful idea. Love the pen pals idea. And of course, social media is huge. Anytime you go to the Azores, everybody asks you, put everything on social media, because that's how people, looking through a social media account is, of course, much, much better than any ads that can be put on regular television. And so, Sabrina, your thoughts on how do we reach second, third, and fourth generations?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I know I definitely have very privileged. My experience with Azores and Portugal as a whole has been very different than I think most people my age. I'm only 23 years old. So the fact that I've gone to Azores probably like 10 11 times, and my life is very different. But I think what's very important for us to understand is that just because you are third, even fourth for some people I'm meeting now, it doesn't mean that you're less Azorean or you're less Portuguese. And we have this idea that assimilation is like a really bad thing or a negative thing. And if you don't speak the language and if you don't marry someone who's Azorean, you are less Azorean than somebody else who has stuck to these same traditions. And I think it's important to, I guess, highlight that our traditions are changing with us and that Azores is a lot more modern than it was in the 60s or the 70s or even before that. And I think if we talk about that more, about what Azores looks like now, they have a really good ecotourism initiative in the Azores going on that's brought a lot of different tourists there. If we focus on that part and not so much, Sanskrit or Matances or any of these other things, I think that'll really bring more people to Azores and connect them with their roots.
Indeed. So bring in the modern Azores, which is another round I'm going to take on that as well. Vivian.
Yeah, so Sabrina just said something that caught my attention. And she said that our traditions are, I don't know exactly what you said, but you said our traditions are kind of going with us, they're like modernizing with us. And I think we need more of that. And this is a conversation that I've actually had with Snurnish a couple times about our traditions being more appealing to the younger crowd or to maybe those Azoreans who don't speak Portuguese, who don't know a lot of it. What can we do to bring them in? And so I think that's a really important step since since I've helped out with the hall here in Hanford. I know sometimes it can be hard to convince some of the older people of making those changes. That it's just not Portuguese enough. Like Sabrina said, it doesn't make you less Portuguese, but if we don't bring in these people, these festas are going to die. So something needs to change. And something else we can do along that line is a lot of us relate to being Portuguese so much or Azorean so much because of what our parents involved us in when we were little and when we were young. And we can get those little kids back into doing things, even if their parents are fourth generation and these little kids are fifth generation. It doesn't matter. Let's bring them in. Let's put them in a dança de carnaval. Let's teach them viola de terra and bundling. Let's put them in the filarmónicas. Like, let's bring these little kids back in, because that's when you instill these new traditions. Sometimes it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, even if they're not that old, even if they're only in their 20s and 30s, if they've never been involved in any of this. Sometimes it's hard to bring them in. So let's start younger.
Indeed. And Paulo.
Yeah, I think it depends on who's doing it, right? So we could go on a larger scale, whether or not embassies are doing specific events to promote the culture, schools. I think having Azores as a study abroad place within colleges would be a great thing to have across the nation. I think events like this, as you're hosting right now, us having conversations about it, and I think that's where, when I'm trying to say like bigger picture, smaller picture, this is something everybody or most people could do. And that is just promote the culture ourselves, talking to our friends, talking to different families that we know. I know for me, I always liked heritage events. I always thought, and I'm in the process of trying to organize one, a big heritage food event where it's just all different cultures, and it's like, maybe 3 entrees that everyone can try a sample of, because that's something I always ran into. Because if I was in school eating and they're like, what do you eat? I'm like, oh, papsa com chouriço. And they're all just like, what's chouriço? And boom, there you go. There's a conversation already. Oh, this is a Portuguese sausage and and whatnot. So I think it starts with us, obviously. I really do. And I think us promoting it, talking to different families, nonprofit organizations doing the same thing, hosting events like this as you are doing today. But it comes down, and also I think if you're trying to promote it to somebody, you want to find what their interests are, right? Like I think, Vivian, you said music was your background, right? So, right? I'm not mistaken. It was Vivian, the music background. Okay, so it's, if you're talking to someone who's interested in music, but they don't know anything about the Azores, maybe, oh, you ever heard of Contaria, Zafi, Jigahada, stuff like that, or bringing up Fadu as well. And it's my criminal justice background. I always thought it was interesting finding specific criminal justice policies that the Azores or Portugal uses and comparing it to what we have here in the US. So I think, but on a smaller scale, like I said, I think it starts with us doing our part to promote it, to try and connect to those third, fourth, and so on generations.
Indeed. And Ashley, your thoughts on it. And that's a good point, Paulo. I just had someone from a prior panel, actually, it was just a conversation with one person very well known in the Portuguese community in East Coast. And he said this was in Portuguese, but the same thing applies in English. He said that, people always say, oh, I'm very proud of being Portuguese. And he said his answer has been in the last 5 years, because he's kind of tired of people saying, I'm very proud of being Azorean, but then, they're not involved in anything. And he said, that's wonderful. What are you going to do about it? And so that's, I guess, a good question to kick back with. Yeah, you're very proud, really. So what are you going to do about it? And when you mentioned that at a personal level, Ashley, your thoughts on how do we expand to second, third, and fourth generations, and beyond the box, beyond the typical thing that we do with a very limited community?
Yeah, I definitely, echo what everybody else has said. I feel like you can find some commonality as far as, like anybody is interested in food, right? Or anybody like might be interested in like comedy or something like that, and then tie it into the Portuguese culture. I also think like at Fresno State, we have been able to start the Portuguese Club, which I think is fantastic. That didn't exist till a couple years ago, which is quite shocking if you think about where we're located and the number of Portuguese people in this community. But I feel like we can't, as second, third generation, it can't stop with us. And I mean, I'll admit I'm guilty of it, right? I'm not as involved as I should be. There's definitely more I can do. But I think if we can at least get, if you're talking to somebody and they say, oh, I found out I'm, whatever, 17% Portuguese, then having those conversations with them about our experience and, what our lifestyle kind of looked at. But just, I think things that are, I think Taylor mentioned, like, don't scare them. You don't have to like take them straight to the matanza, but also let them educate themselves about it. And I think the Azores is something that is way underplayed and way underpublished. I've been to Hawaii, I've been to the Azores. Obviously, I'd rather go back to the Azores just because that's in my blood and in my culture. But anybody would enjoy the Azores. You don't have to be Portuguese to enjoy it, but most people don't even know about it. When, if in talking to somebody, they find out I'm Portuguese, they say, oh, Brazilian or Portugal? I'm like, neither. So I think just getting the word out, and like, Portuguese people were very prideful. We have a lot of pride in our culture. And I think we need to not be shy about that. I mean, we don't have to be arrogant about it, but don't be shy about it. Things like this are fantastic. I wish there was more of this. I wish there was more schools that taught Portuguese. I wish there was more schools that have Portuguese clubs. I mean, thankfully where I live, I'm surrounded by Portuguese things. I can go to a Portuguese bakery if I want to, but you're not going to find that in, middle America in the middle of nowhere. So just trying to kind of keep traditions alive and maybe just self-promoting, kind of like Paulo said, we can't let it stay stagnant with us.
Indeed, Anthony, very good points, Anthony. And you put on the chat something that I'd like you to share with everybody that didn't read it. One of the ideas that you put, and you have others, I'm sure.
Yeah, I typed in there about, because Duarte Silva had said about a program you guys could do with PALCUS or PBI regarding people's 23andMe and whether they're Portuguese or not. And I was saying how there could be a program like Where Do You Come From, that genealogy show, but make it a Portuguese based one. Like, how Portuguese are you? Or what Portuguese are you? Where are you from? Being a pop culture movie TV fanatic since I could learn how to count, for the longest time, all we had mainstream that was Portuguese was the movie Mystic Pizza. And I would love the movie, but for the longest time, I'd be like, we do pizza? Is that what we do? Do we do pizza? Well, it's a great movie, whatever. And so part of it was like, I was thirsty to see our culture in mainstream. You know, for Italians, you've had The Godfather for the longest time. With Hemingway, you know, he's half the reason Spain is so well known. It's always been joked that if Hemingway went to Portugal and saw bulls instead of Spain, maybe the Portuguese would be more well known in mainstream than Spain would be. So thanks, Hemingway. But in my case, I've been trying to see if there's ways of like putting it out there to those who don't know about it, whether it be sharing these travel videos that a guy named Chris Howe puts out. He has an Instagram account and YouTube. He has these amazing travel videos, and he went to the Azores, and he has like this extremely high definition camera, 4K, and he went everywhere. And and our islands are beautiful, but on his camera, it just brought it out even more. Like it looked like a travel video you'd see for Hawaii or something, but it was the Azores, the way he did it. And so I try to share that stuff with friends of mine who don't know much about it, but like I have buddies who are Irish and Scottish. And I would joke with them at first and saying, hey, we're all Celtic. We fought the Romans. Look what we got. And I'd show them what we have that's Portuguese. And I'd show them like this, the pega. And they'd be like, you guys do that? And like it got their like manly, like Celtic brain going, you guys just grab the bull and okay, all right, when's the festa? They would ask me when the festa is. And so it's like knowing your audience and finding a way to promote it to them that way. And like with my podcast, I'm trying to find these specific Portuguese stories that I would want to turn into screenplays, but no way can I crank them out now. So I make a podcast instead and teaching them about Aristides Uzumenge and how he went against Salazar, and a future podcast with Peter Francisco, how he was an Azorean who fought in the revolution. And, you know, just kind of like little bits here and there where we get more stories. Like eventually we got Passionada, which is a much more Portuguese story than Mystic Pizza. Takes place in New England, and just more in depth of the culture. So, you know, besides just saying that we have Tom Hanks, who has a quarter or a little bit less than Portuguese in him, just building more stories that we can tell, whether it's film, television, social media, travel.
Thank you. Some very good ideas, and I've got them jotted down. I have one question that when I sent you some thoughts, you know, to think about. One of the questions that I wanted to touch upon is the Azores today versus the Azores of your parents or your grandparents. And we had an event yesterday with some younger folks also from the Azores, and we talked about that. How do we bring the Azores here? Because sometimes our culture here, and I don't take this, and if you take it as a derogatory, as it's not meant to be that way, but sometimes our culture is very stuck on things that are no longer as popular as they once were in the Azores. But because people came from there, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that's what they look like, you know, that's what they look at, or are only very popular in one area. And I'll give you an example, you know, every village still, or just about every single freguesia still has a Filarmónica, but there are Filarmónicas playing. I was in the Azores 2 years ago for a talk that I gave in the city of Angra, and the Filarmónica from one of the freguesias in Terceira Porto Judeu played classical music. Okay. And so, you know, and our Filarmónicas, they play the same passo doble that they've been playing for 20 years. And so my thought is this, there is a movement in the Azores, a contemporary art. For example, in São Miguel, there's a Center for Contemporary Arts that is a magnificent, just the building itself is magnificent, but everything that they have there, you know, it's modern art, you know, and the Azoreans are trying to connect with the diaspora by saying, listen, we're creating here. It's not the same islands as far as creativity is concerned that it was 30, 40 years ago. So, you know, first of all, the communities don't know about this. And many times when we go back, we stay within our village and we don't see this if we don't go to these places. I told the story that when I taught high school, I had years ago, still in the old VHS, you know what those things are. And I had a VHS that was made of all the different museums in the Azores. Okay. And I would play a little bit each day. I would do a segment with my upper level Portuguese about the museums in the Azores. And I had this kid argue with me for 15 minutes or even longer until I finally made him not argue anymore. We have to do that in high school, that he had just been to Terceira. He had been there 5 times, and that was not in Terceira because there's no museum in Terceira because he knows Terceira. So, and there's a very good museum in Angra do Heroísmo, and there's museums. Every single island has at least one, and some of them more. And so how do you think we should focus on, and what could we do to bring the new Azores to the community? And I know that many of you might think, well, the older generation, my generation and older, people who are 60, I'm 62. So people who are 60 plus, they're going to get offended. They don't want that. They don't want it. But, we're on our way down. Okay. Let's just, let's look at the 3rd and 4th generation. Let's look at the younger people. Don't worry about the older ones. You're not going to change them. As someone said here, you can't teach an old dog a new trick, because it's Vivian. So let's not worry about that. How do we do this? How do we bring the new Azores? What ideas do you have that you, in yourself and what you do, all of you are involved in education, arts, in one way or another? How do we bring what is people your age, 20, 30s, 20s and 30s, up to the mid 30s and even early 40s, who are being very creative? And, some of the contemporary artists in Portugal, and Sabrina knows this well, they're just as good as the ones here in the United States. They just come from a very small place and they don't have the opportunities that we have here. But how do we do that? How do we bring to your generation, whether you're sons or daughters of immigrants, and 2nd and 3rd and 4th generation, the new Azores, and what venues could we use to bring what is the new archipelago, that I think it would be a way to have much more awareness from 2nd and 3rd generations? Because, all of a sudden they'll go to a museum in San Jose, California, and there's a room dedicated to the Portuguese that's besides the Holy Ghost Festa. And that is important. I'm not saying the Holy Ghost Festa is not important. So let's contextualize that, so I don't get a bunch of hate mail. But the idea is that there is more to the new archipelago. So I'll start with Anthony this time and give Taylor a break. And I'll start with Anthony. What are your thoughts on bringing these new Azores that are totally unknown in most segments of our community?
There's one of the prime examples I think of is when, Stanley Tucci has his Searching for Italy series on CNN, or when Anthony Bourdain would go to the Azores or Portugal. There's finding these, like you said, there's the Holy Ghost Festival, which you can't forget about, or the Our Lady of Fatima, but there are other things in the culture that we can focus on along with that. And so we can doing social media posts or podcasting where you're talking about certain aspects of the islands, or little video packages, like little iMovie or Final Cut video packages of certain aspects of the Azores, and posting them all over social, putting them on a YouTube page, putting them on Facebook or Instagram stories, building them in a way where it's new and entertaining, where it's not like it's not necessarily an old video from the 60s or 70s that has to feature old classical Portuguese music. It could be, music today, music that fits the vibe of what you're going for, not necessarily with our ancestry, but showing the beauty of it. And having someone, whether it's just video with a narration over, or a host like Stanley Tucci, or someone who's presenting certain aspects of it, and showing that how the Azores now are very much a tourist destination, showing how we now have these special platforms where you can see certain beautiful parts of the islands. I share them on my Instagram all the time, and making it in a way that it's easily accessible, because now with social media, all you need is a free account and you can see everything. So if you have an account that's on every certain platform that is of a video or a photo or a story you're telling, that's a way to grab people. And you were saying about the older generations, they have a tendency of wanting respect for our heritage, but not telling anybody about it. It's this weird game that's played where we love our ancestry, but it's our thing. Go do your thing. And we need to be more of we love this, we love our culture, check out why we love our culture, and doing that in a video or media source.
Indeed. Sabrina, you've been back and forth for a while now doing your master's, and even before that. How do you bring, and you're very well aware of what's going on in Portugal in the arts in all aspects. How do you bring that also here? What are your thoughts on it?
I think the thing that probably opened up my eyes the most is a few years ago. I think it was 2018. I went back to Azores for the summer by myself. I was going back and forth from Lisbon, Azores. So I went for a couple of weeks, and I went to music festivals in São Miguel. I went to Monteverde, which is in Ribeira Grande, and I saw James Arthur playing and Steve Aoki alongside some other Portuguese artists. So it was like contemporary music. This is not like a Sanskrit festa where they have, a philharmonica playing. This was like big concerts full of other young people like myself who were just going to listen to music. And then there was the Festival de RFM. It's another. So I think it's very important to talk about Azores primarily as a modern place, right? These are modern islands. They are changing the same way that we are changing here in the US. The diaspora is not different than Azores. They're not stuck in the 80s like we think they are. So I think that it's just important to really talk about how they look just like we do. They also have iPhones. It's not like they don't have internet anymore. And no meu tempo já não tinha televisão. Okay, well, they do now. Like I just think if we just talk about that, and we don't have to be afraid of it. And I think that's a big problem for the diaspora here, for our community, is that we're afraid to let go, because we think if we let go of the idea we have of the old country, then we lose that. We lose the connection. And it's no longer what we remember. Those are our memories. Those are the memories of our parents and our grandparents. And it's okay to say your memories are valid and they're real and they're important, but the reality is a little bit different. And that's okay too. There's a lot more that connects us than that separates us. So.
Indeed, that's a very good point. And I'll build upon that, the connection. So Vivian, as someone who is a music teacher, don't you think it'd be cool to have direct contact and even exchanges with music teachers in high schools in the Azores?
100%. I would absolutely love that. And that kind of brings me into what the point that I was going to make. I was going to say that we should each, find our interest. And I think maybe it was Paul that said, whether it be music or comedy or food or whatever, I might be wrong, but I think it was Paul. And try to bring different aspects of that in. Like, for example, in my senior recital, when you major in music, you have to do a recital at the end before you graduate. I begged my professor, because there's all these there's all these requirements. You have to sing in French, Italian, and German. And I'm like, okay, but I want to do Portuguese classical music. Like, can I research some Portuguese people? And I actually sang 2 songs from some Azorean composers in my recital, and I studied them. I teach choir, right? So in the past, I have brought, classical music that is Portuguese in and taught it to my students. Things like that. I think it was Senor Borges mentioned that he went 2 years ago, saw Philharmonica, and they're playing classical music, not, the da 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 da, that we're used to hearing all the time at every festa. And it's funny because I actually had a conversation with my husband like 3 days ago, that why can't they just play something else and play something more interesting? And there's so many modern living composers in Portugal doing so many cool things that we can bring in. And if your interest is food, what new things are they coming up with, food wise? Am I frozen?
Yeah, we're having an issue with your audio. We can see you, but we're having an issue with your audio. Let's see, you are frozen now. Taylor, what do we do to connect and bring the new Azores to the communities? And again, the same thing. Wouldn't it be cool for you to hook up with local comedians? There's not many comedians in the Azores, but there are. It's a different take on comedy. But the arts in general. How do people who create here have a connection with those who create there and have that fusion?
Yeah, awesome. Great question. I will say I have done my fair share of connecting with Portuguese comedians and Azorean comedians. There's actually quite a few. I was lucky enough to go on tour with Fernando Rocha when he was here, which was awesome. And then Helfimed, Helder Medeiros from San Miguel, who was a very, very funny Azorean. I got to do a few shows with him in Canada and on the East Coast. We had an absolute blast. And it's funny how many similarities we find, and how we listened to him do a set in English. And he asked us after he did it how it went. And the rest of the night, we're having beers and talking about things that he said that kind of translated funny or things. And then he even played the next day. When he did his bid, he played on those things like to have fun. It was really cool. So I do think there's definitely something positive to that. I will say too, I feel like a challenge regarding this whole concept, kind of the blame, not I don't know if blame is the right word, but the responsibility falls on both parties. I feel like on one hand, we have an older Portuguese generation who brought these traditions here, right? And as we know, over time, everything evolves, right? For example, somebody who listened to music in the 60s heard a song, and then Rihanna or, whatever group remade the song, and maybe they enjoyed it, maybe they didn't, but life goes on. Somehow that memory still gets to live within the new generation. Oh, I know that song. So in a weird way, there is a connection. However, the older Portuguese generation sometimes forgets that the strongest communities that you can build, and I forget whose famous quote this is, the strongest communities you can build are ones where you can plant seeds for trees that you will never sit under and enjoy the shade. I feel like sometimes the seniors forget that you have to leave us with something when you leave as well. And you have to leave us with a little control, let us kind of adapt it so that we can carry that torch and things can continue to become something else, whether or not it's exactly what they want, right? The other thing is, as Portuguese people and Azoreans, we need to do a better job of welcoming maybe people who aren't as familiar with the culture and have a little bit of Portuguese in them. I always refer to the moment, I think about the Shamarita, right? The Shamarita, right? It's a popular dance. If you're doing it at a festa and somebody tries to join that circle, God forbid they try to break into that circle and they don't know how to do it, everyone's like, get out of here. Hey, epa, sai daqui pra fora. Get out of here, right? But if you're at a wedding and there's guests who are Portuguese and guests who are not, etc., and they come in and try to break that circle, everyone plays around, has a good time. You teach them a little bit. They might learn a little. They might just have a good time, but they're more likely to be interested in finding out more about that or coming back or having fun. It goes to show that we have to let people in as well, and I know that sounds funny, but as someone who's introduced a lot of non-Portuguese people to the Portuguese festas, and believe me, they love them. Like my friends tend to throw up after a crab chipino twice a year. So they enjoy Portuguese events. We need to be able to welcome those people, bring them through the door, let them know, hey, this is what we do. You're welcome here. We want to grow this thing. Come back. And here's why, So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if that answers anything, but that's something that crosses my mind a lot.
No, it does. It does. And Paulo, your take on it, and also how do we take this concept that Taylor was talking about? How do we make the younger generation a little bit more involved? And sometimes taking what Taylor said, and I agree, is that you're just going to have to take over because some older generation will never let go. So you're just going to have to take over whether you like it or not. You may not make a lot of friends in the beginning, but it's much needed, and making people responsible. Because a little while ago, Vivian was made the chat there comment that where she teaches, they have a Portuguese club at their they're trying to teach Portuguese. And there's no reason why Hanford High School shouldn't have Portuguese, because it is an area that has a lot of Portuguese, number one. And then number two, the superintendent who's been there 2 years is Portuguese. Now, if he can't get Portuguese on there, then why have a Portuguese superintendent? Quite honestly, I mean, I just think that we have to make our people also responsible, as Taylor said. They have to be responsible. If you're like my friend from the East Coast said, you're Portuguese, you're proud, wonderful. What are you going to do about it? So if there's a person who is in charge of a school, let's bug him until the end of time for him or her to put Portuguese on there. If you're a principal or a superintendent of a school, no reason not to have Portuguese on there. I mean, what are you waiting for? So Paulo, you've been involved in a lot of aspects, including, some political movements. How important is it for us to make those who are Portuguese in these positions of power, and we have one right now, Senator Michael Rodrigues, we'll talk to him in a little bit, but how do you make these folks basically, how do you make them responsible and moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think it goes across the board, whether it be education or political, right? Just holding people accountable, right? So like you mentioned for your school, if you want to have Portuguese in your school, then that's us gathering together saying, hey, we need so many kids to support this, whether it be starting a petition, whether it be, talking to your principal and starting it. But I wanted to connect, I think Amanda mentioned the pen pals, right? Was that Amanda's idea? And I want to connect an idea that you had, and that is, if we look at schools that are predominantly in Portuguese neighborhoods, so collegiately, let's say UMass Dartmouth, for example, right? Or different high schools in Fall River, New Bedford, having those relationships with the different teachers, right? Let's say it's literature that you're learning, connecting them with a literature teacher in Portugal, because there are great poets from the Azores as well. There are great authors from the Azores. And if we're going to promote them, then who's to say, hey, we can't put a budget, a line item saying, or even now, since it's Zoom, you could have these Zoom conversations with different people in that specific topic, right? Whether it be literature or any type of the arts, and promoting them at the same time in your school, but specifically, I mean, it comes to us to hold people accountable, right? It's literally an email to sending to Senator Michael Rodrigues and saying, hey, this is something I'm passionate about. Is there something we can organize in the neighborhood, right? I feel like sometimes people don't think that's possible. It's like, well, you don't know until you email, right? You don't know until you actually try it. So I think it's a lot of just holding people accountable and trying to turn your ideas into an action is one of the most important parts, because it's possible. But if we're talking specifically promoting the individuals in the Azores, I think having schools having relationships, or even, and some of them do at the University of the Azores and whatnot. But I think even like here, we bring specifically for Contarin Zafij Gahadas, we have individuals who come specifically from the Azores to sing at different events here. We've had specific individuals from Terceira come here, specific individuals from San Miguel. So it's on us to, again, make our turn our ideas into actions in reality. So.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Ashley, a couple of thoughts. For actually taking it into the university aspect and your job and what you're familiar with, of course, the academic world. How in the academic world do we make this? Do we make a bigger presence of the Portuguese American experience, and of course, certainly the Azorean experience?
Sure. So obviously, I feel a little bit more fortunate because I do work at Fresno State, and Denisia's done a lot of work over the last few years as far as making the Portuguese culture much more known at Fresno State. But I remember being a student there, and even when I first started working there, and they would do all these different cultural weeks, and they would bring in dancers, from the Hmong culture, from the Latino culture. And I always thought in the back of my mind, like, I danced folklore for like 24 years. Like, I could be out there representing, the Azorean culture. And so I feel like we're making progress, at least at Fresno State. And we bring high school students onto campus to kind of introduce them to the university. And I've helped with webinars on kind of trying to like recruit them and just educate them. But I think as far as education as a whole outside of Fresno State, you have to have a cheerleader somebody has to be there and has to be persistent about bringing it up. And, like Paulo said, you can't just say it and then walk away. You have to keep at it, especially in education, because everything takes an approval and another approval and another approval. And so you can't just say something and walk away. I think it's important, if it's something that you're really passionate about, whether it's to bring a particular, music to the curriculum or particular language to the curriculum, but finding out, okay, what is this going to entail? And then committing to it. When I found out about the PBBI at Fresno State, I immediately emailed Denise. I was like, I've never met you. This is my name. I work on campus, would love to be involved in any way that I can. And I've participated in anything that he's asked me. I've promoted these events to my family and friends. So I'm trying to do my part in what I can do too, even if it's just, local here in California, it's at least something. But we have family back in the Azores, and sending this out to my aunts and uncles, they could then forward it to them. They may be watching, like, we have no idea. So you never know what one little gesture might do, but you also can't expect to get results if you're not willing to fight the fight. So I feel like if we can all stay motivated and all stay passionate about this, I think that will help a lot for, future things.
Indeed. And Amanda, we need to hear a little bit from you. I'd like to hear from you, especially the aspect of, as a college student, what would be interesting to have in all colleges independently. Some colleges have more connections, of course, Dartmouth does, and other colleges have more connections with the Azores and mainland Portugal as well. But what, as a college student, would be important to see more of a presence of the Azores throughout, the campus that you're at, albeit virtual nowadays, it seems?
One thing that I noticed the last time that I was in the Azores is I was driving and I would look into a field. There'd be a little building, and then I saw graffiti tagged on the side of the building, but it wasn't just words that you can't read. It was spray paint, but it was a beautiful mural, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of, I guess, great modern artists that are in the Azores. I don't know if it was a Banksy thing and they want to be they don't want to share who they are. But when I saw that, I was like, oh, I would love to learn more about the kids that are around my age in the 20s, and the art that's happening in the schools. And maybe if there's new forms of art that are happening in the Azores, they could connect with high schools that are in the US and kind of share different ways that they express art. Also, when Sabrina said that there was a concert with James Arthur and Steve Aoki, that's something that's intriguing, not only for people who have Azorean ancestry, but just anyone. Also, promoting the Azores as a travel spot. I do also tell my friends that it's kind of the Hawaii of Portugal, but if people were to do those videos, I think it's cool to highlight cool events Red Bull has a sports cliff jumping thing. And when you go to certain restaurants, when you go to the Azores, you're not just going to be a fish out of water. And if you don't speak Portuguese, you're going to be completely lost. When you go to restaurants, there's menus in English. There's a lot more youth and people that are our age that you can go to certain events. It's not just this old historic place with all these old traditions. They do have beautiful traditions, which are super fun to learn about, but it can be a place that everyone can go enjoy, not only just the older generations going to visit where they grew up.
Indeed. And I'm going to pose one last question to all of you, but before, I'm going to bring in Senator Michael Rodriguez. And before I do that, a couple of things. First and foremost, I just wanted you to think of one thing, and that is, first of all, most of you are sons and daughters of immigrants who came what we term as the post-Capelinhos volcano. So it was the newer immigration that came thanks to the Azorean Refugee Act. So when people talk about refugees, we had our own. And so, and it brought 5,000 people from the Azores. And that's what That's what propelled the big immigration of the 1960s and 70s, where lots of your parents or grandparents came. So, but you're either sons or daughters of that last exodus of immigration from the Azores. And it took a lot, whether it be in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or California, the three main areas where there's lots of Azoreans, or even in New Jersey, there's a pocket of New Jersey of Azoreans. It took a lot for these folks to start these organizations, because some of the older organizations existed, but not the newer organizations. For example, in California, all the Filarmonicas had died, and it was that generation that began the Portuguese marching bands, that began the folklore groups, that began a lot of these things. And the same thing in Massachusetts. A lot of the things are now 40, 50, 60 years ago by that generation. So it took them a lot, and they ticked off a few people to put these things forward. I can tell you, because I remember as a child when I came over, some of the people that were starting these organizations, and I'm talking about now 50 years ago, and some of the older people that had been here, it ticked them off. So you might have to tick off a few people and what you do, but it's okay. It's okay, because the legacy is more important than someone who is stubborn in his or her old way. The question I'm going to ask each one of you, and then you will comment after Senator Michael Rodriguez, we hear from him, but I'd like you to think already about it. So let's say that you were president, and I've asked this to every single panel. You were president of the government of the Azores. So congratulations, you just got elected, Taylor, president of the island of the Azores. I don't think you could be, because you're from São Jorge, but people from São Miguel have a better chance, because it's half the population is there. It's just a fact. Sorry, but it's just a fact. So, but if you were president of the government of the Azores, knowing, as you know, the diaspora here, you were born in it, you've been involved one way or another all of your lives, okay? And so knowing the diaspora, knowing the communities, some of you have traveled, outside of your own communities, and so you know that well. What two things would you implement that would be important for the connection between the Azores and the diaspora? Because if that connection ever dies, the diaspora will not be the same diaspora. So what two things would you implement as president of the government of the Azores to further bring the diaspora to the Azores and the Azores to the diaspora? Because that's what exchange is all about. It can't just be one way. We need to know more about the Azores, but they also need to know more about us. Now, think about that for a couple of minutes. We're going to talk to Senator Michael Rodriguez. He was following us, and I made him get out of his pajamas and get on to, we're older, so we get in our pajamas early, and get into working environments. But he's a very dear friend who I respect. There's only one bad thing about Senator Michael Rodriguez, is he's senator in Massachusetts instead of senator in California, but we're going to have to forgive him about that. For that, we wish he was here, because he's such a power. You guys in Massachusetts and Rhode Island don't know what you have. You have a true gem. And so my thought is this. I would like to basically, of course, thank Senator Michael Rodriguez for being here today. He's been here a couple other times. He's been as an attendee in 3 other sessions, at least, if not more. Thank you for following this event, this whole entire week. Thank you for your public service and your thoughts on these young people and what you've seen so far in the community.
Thank you, Dinesh. Can you hear me okay? Because
Perfect.
I was having some technical, beautiful. Well, first of all, you need to forgive me also, because I am not Azorean. I am continent. So please forgive me.
You're an honorary Azorean, okay?
Honorary Azorean, but
Yes,
when you
yes.
represent in the legislature the city of Fall River, Massachusetts for over 25 years, you're an honorary Azorean, and I have been to the Azores too many times to count, 2, 3, 4 times per year. I was very involved in the restoration of the oldest post-Inquisition synagogue in Portugal, which is in São Miguel, in Ponta Dourada, and that's my interest. And when I hear about Aristide Sousa Mendes, we had, unfortunately, a very anti-Semitic issue here in Massachusetts just this week, and a piece of legislation that I filed relative to genocide and Holocaust education is at the forefront of our media right now. They asked me, you know, I told them, I said, I have two heroes in my life. One is Martin Luther King Jr. and the other is Aristides Sousa Mendes. But these young people, this is, it's so inspiring to see these young Portuguese Azorean Americans who are so proud in their heritage. I'm third generation. My grandparents immigrated in 1919, pre-Salazar. So it was pre-Salazar, right? You know, it's an amazing story of how they sacrificed to come to this country. My grandfather's first, a year before my grandmother, and she showed up in Fall River, Massachusetts, but nothing but a sewing machine. Okay, and from that they proceeded to have 10 children, one of whom was my dad, and I have cousins. I have 56 first cousins, and it's very helpful come election time. Let me tell you, to have a family like that in the district. And until I was 18 years old, every single Sunday after church, you went to Vavo's house for dinner and we ate in shifts. But it was that I grew up in that culture. I grew up as a Benfiquista my whole life, you know, and to see again now this generation who are my children's age, with the pride of their heritage and the pride of their culture, in wanting to expose this heritage and culture to all Americans, not just Portuguese or Azorean Americans. It's very inspiring. So congratulations to you, Denise, for organizing these events, and only for you would I get out of my pajamas and.
Thank you. And I can't even vote for you. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if you were in California and I could vote for you?
Oh boy.
But you know, maybe when you retire from Massachusetts State Senate, you can move out to California and retire and run for office.
When I retire, I'll be up in the bed alta.
There you go.
Yes,
there you go. But you'll visit San Miguel often.
All the time. And you know, and if I were the president of the Azores, you asked that question. I've noticed that that's the last question. And yes. First of all, the president now, Bolieiro, is actually a very close personal friend of mine. I've been friendly with all the presidents since Mota Amaral. But this is the first time where a close personal friend of mine became president. I didn't become friends with them after president. And, you know, I would take a lesson from our Jewish American friends. They have a program called Birthright, where every Jewish American young person, after they graduate from high school, can go spend a summer or a period of time in Israel to learn about their heritage and culture. You know, I really think it's important for the third and fourth generation young Azorean Americans, Portuguese Americans, to go back to Portugal, to the Azores, to learn that and to experience for themselves how 21st century Azores is nothing like the land, the country that their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents left. It's modern, it's cutting edge, you know, it's historical, but yet you get Wi-Fi everywhere. You can sit in a cafe anywhere and be tuned into Wi-Fi. In many cases, it's more technologically advanced than this country. I think that's what I would do if I was president of the Azores.
Thank you. Well, and you have a friend there, so let's put the.
I haven't seen him. Seen him.
Yeah, it's tough.
I think the last time I was there, you were there, Denise, right? Yeah. And that was November. Was it November 2019?
2019. Yeah, 2019.
Yeah, that was the last time I was there, and the pandemic has forced me to cancel a number of trips. And when I was there, and I had dinner with Bolieiro, and he was telling me, tomorrow I announce I'm running for president. And I'm thinking, good luck, Vasco Cordero. He's a very popular man. An incumbent has never been beat in the Azores, right?
But politics are politics.
But I like that, you know, and him and Zé Andrade, another dear friend of mine. Anyway, So happy to be here.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for your
anything
time.
for you and anything for Miguel Vaz.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Senator Michael Rodriguez, for taking time. And so there's a question to all of you. And before I turn it to you, there's been a couple of comments I'd like to share with you and on Facebook, and people always have some nice comments. And there's one comment from one person who had an excellent suggestion, which is promoting in the local libraries where there's Portuguese American communities, duolingual children's books. And that is actually the Brazilian community is doing that in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And that is an excellent way to teach culture along with a little bit of language as well. So bilingual readings in school libraries, and it can be open, of course, to everyone, not just those who are Azorean ancestry, but it's a way to promote it. So we're going to start with Sabrina because she's been back there a gazillion times and she could probably run. She speaks Portuguese, of course, very, very well. And so she could go ahead and run for president of the government of the Azores and give President Bolieiro a run for his money. And so tell me, what would you do as president of the government of the Azores? What 2 actions would you take to bring the diaspora closer to the Azores and vice versa? And of course, one of the suggestions we had yesterday, I can already tell you, that one's off limits now. So if you have that one, erase it, which is, I just would get better SATA planes. We all want better SATA planes. So, that one is off the limits,
That's
because
exactly what I was going to say.
So better SATA planes are off the grid on that one, because that is probably something that we could get a very, very large. Portuguese Americans don't like to protest, but they'll probably protest to get better SATA planes. Sabrina.
I think it's funny you mentioned that. I really was going to say that as
Were you? Okay.
a joke. I swear to God I was. But I think the 2 things that I would focus on the most, that are the most important to me, is education, the connection between education in Azores and in the US, in the diaspora in the US, and also business, which I think a lot of people tend to forget. Azorean business owners in the diaspora are very, very important for Azores. And the Azorean businesses in Azores are very important for us as well. It's not just, Gonçalves that makes, Portuguese products. It's not just that. It's the tiny little businesses that we don't really think about. It's your local talho. It's all these things, the little corner store in your town or in your city. Those are really important to maintain the connection between the Azoreans, both here and back in Azores. And also the education. I think someone had mentioned, I don't know if it was Paulo or someone, like a foreign exchange or a study abroad to Azores. That's so important because the Azoreans living there and who are studying there at the universities or at the high school, they want to know what it's like here. They want to connect with us. And odds are a lot of them have cousins that live here, because I think every single person in Azores can say that they have family in the US or in Canada. And I think it's important to keep that, the connection there and the education, not just the language, not just the culture, but everything in exchange completely.
Some very good points, 2 good points. And so President Anthony Shivers.
My name is Anthony Steves and I approve of this message. No, it would be 2 things would be my 2 favorite things, and be an exchange of history and the arts. I see a connection that can form where, we talk about Peter Francisco, who was kidnapped from Terceira and became brought to the US and, the colonies, and fought in the American Revolution. George Washington called him the giant of the revolution. So we share that with both our cultures, where this person from Terceira was brought to the colonies and helped fight for the revolution. We also educate here because, recently I saw an article from an outlet that was trying to promote Salazar. And like Senator Rodriguez, I'm a Suzamenge guy, and this felt very false about Salazar. So I want us to know the history on both sides, teach Americans about Portuguese history, teach Portuguese about American history and how the 2 are connected. And with the arts, I see the arts as being a way of teaching those history lessons, whether it's through song, whether it's through film, television, podcasts. Again, I'm sorry I keep going to what I'm biased on, but podcasts, teaching the story back and forth regarding those history lessons. And I think that is a way of bridging it between both cultures and making people more interested via history and the arts themselves.
Very good points. Amanda, President Amanda Clemente, what would you do? What would be two things to bring to bring the Azores to the diaspora and the diaspora to the Azores?
I think that one thing that we have learned from this pandemic and everything going online is that sometimes, the media can be very powerful. And so if I were the president, I would want to have some sort of media campaign or show highlighting like the history of the Azores, but then also highlighting the new modernized Azores, not only to the second and third, fourth generation Azorean Americans who may have lost touch with their heritage, but also to teach the people that are currently, going to the halls and about the young people that are living in the Azores that they might not have experienced since they've been living in the United States for many years. And then what Sabrina said, I never really thought of, but the really like highlighting and asserting the importance of those Azorean and Portuguese businesses that are in the United States, I think would be very important, because growing up, I went to like Cavalheiros, which is a restaurant and a bakery, and that really helped to keep my connection to the Azores alive, but also helped to expose other people living in Massachusetts that aren't Azorean or Portuguese to the culture. So I think that would also be something very important to do.
Indeed, and that's a good point on the media. It's I've been a proponent I've been a proponent in the Azores media that the television, the RTP, RTP, not only because of RTP International, but also we can watch any RTP show now just online, that all of their programs should have subtitles in English. If they want to reach second, third, and fourth generation, just put subtitles in English. It's not that hard nowadays. There are computer programs that do it with a pretty good accuracy. So have subtitles in English so the younger generation can, even the newscast from the Azores, there's no reason if you want to reach second and third, fourth generation, you're not going to do the same newscast in English, obviously, but have subtitles in English so second and third and fourth generations can follow along. So we went from, we'll go to President Paulo Salgueiro. What would you do, Paulo? A couple of things.
Yeah, so for one, and forgive me, I don't know if this exists. Is there a committee on for something like this in the Azores already to promote these events in artistic arts, or no?
There isn't. I mean, there is.
So
what there is in the Azores is the Direção Regional das Comunidades that kind of has it's a government body, but there isn't a civil society committee to promote the arts, through Azorean arts.
So right away, President Paul Salgueiro would have a committee for the diaspora. So it would be, and I think that's important. I don't see why that can't be done, to be honest. And I say committee because I don't know if it's the same in the Azores, but here locally, if it's a commission, you can't use any funds for any of your events you want to promote. So if it's committee, you can obviously use funds. I'm sure people would willingly donate to some type of fund to promote such events. And I think also, whether it be RTP or another thing off the media, there's a journalist on the East Coast here, Rick Manu, who writes a lot of articles promoting Portuguese Americans, Luso-Americans, and obviously Azoreans Americans as well. And I think that's important to know too, because it's good to see the Azorean Americans can be CEOs. They can be, I always say, we can be employers. We don't necessarily have to be the employee all the time. So for starters, if I was actually the president, I would definitely have a committee specifically designated for diaspora. And I think Senator Rodrigues could probably speak to this. At one point, I don't know if it's still happening, Senator, but I guess it's promoting an art here. The New Bedford Whaling Museum at one point was going to do an exhibit on Domingos Rebelo and his work. So events like that, whether you find a big venue, promote promote it through social media, get people out there to engage, to learn about these Azorians that have contributed so much specifically to the arts. But I think one of the biggest ones that could probably be done is honestly forming a committee specifically designated for that.
Okay, indeed. President Ashley Fergundis.
So I think two things. The first thing, of course, for me that comes to mind has to do with education, because that's the world that I live in. But I feel like if we could promote more internship opportunities for Azorean students to come to the States and vice versa. I know Fresno State is offering one in the Azores right now. And even like study abroad. Obviously, COVID has kind of put a damper on some of those things, but if I was president, hopefully we would get rid of COVID. I don't know, I'd make it happen. But I think internship, study abroad, there's no better way to learn about a culture than to immerse yourself into it. And so, you know, I meet with students all the time that want to go on study abroad, and nobody's ever said the Azores as a place, you know? And so I think that that would be great if we could, you know, create some partnerships there and promote education in that sense, just because I feel like you would get much more exposure, much more appreciation for the culture, whether it's Azorean students coming here or Americans going to the Azores. The other thing I think that would be nice, and maybe Paulo's committee could help with this, is we talked about, you know, maybe updating some of the Azorean traditions that we participate in the US, but what about updating them even in the Azores? If there was some sort of cross collaboration of, you know, maybe at one of the festas in the States, there's not only a Portuguese band that entertains, but also an American band, and vice versa in the Azores, or something like that. It doesn't have to be the music part, maybe it's the food part or something, but trying to maybe assimilate the traditions to where it's not just the Azorean Americans that are on board to modernize these traditions, but even in the Azores, making it a part of their norm as well.
Indeed, indeed. And President Taylor Amarante, besides making it mandatory that every single Azorean in the Azores and in the diaspora attend at least 2 Amarante comic shows per year, what else? What 2 other events would you do?
Well, first of all, if Ashley's President Ashley's ending COVID, then I'm definitely down to be your VP, your running mate. I want to be on that. Yeah.
You gotta throw it out there for it to happen, you know.
Hey, let's give them what they want. Hey, vote for me, and the Buchanans are free. There it is. Boom. If I was the president, I'd probably focus on 2 areas, right? I'd form a committee. One committee would focus on access. And what I mean by access is, and I also had written SATA down in my notes, but I'm not here to bury SATA. But what I am here to say is why there at some point here has got to be additional ways to get access to the Azores. And I know some airlines are privately owned, some are owned by the government, et cetera, et cetera. But unless we expand a little bit on who can fly in and out of there and what pricing looks like and access, then I think that would play a toll on it, or I'm sorry, would have a positive impact on the islands. The other thing is incentives. Now, I'm familiar with the golden visa there in Portugal, and I know if you buy a piece of property, you know, valued at, I think it's $500,000 and up or something like that, then, you know, you have the opportunity to get your papers. Now, I feel like if we looked at incentives in different areas, right? And there's probably some of these. I know the golden visa, bringing a business to Portugal also qualifies. But what about expanding that to, you know, if colleges and schools around the United States teach Portuguese and you complete, you know, a 2-year program or whatever it is, then maybe there's some sort of a credit or some sort of a experience or something that you then have access to in Portugal or in the Azores, right? Like, hey, here's my certificate for learning Portuguese. I'm either a little bit Portuguese or I'm not Portuguese at all. That's something where people in Portugal and the government should say, wow, these are the kind of people we want over here. Like, how can we reward them and thank them for learning this language by hosting them and bringing them here or doing something, right? I know the birthright idea is also very cool. I forgot who had mentioned that. That is also very cool. And I think another thing is the exchange student program. Having been someone who did an exchange student program in Portugal, it changed my life. It opened my eyes to so much more than just language and culture. I formed lifelong friendships with people there who are going to be ultimately flying here this summer for my wedding, who I met through being an exchange student. I was fortunate enough to work for Benfica here in North America off of meetings I had during that time with people who ended up being in positions of power within the club. So getting there and giving them access, reward these kids, let them come study there. Let them, I don't know, but I think it has to do with access and incentives, because I know incentives are something that really people depend on now and love chasing. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Vote for me.
And those are very good 2 cents. Very, very good. And indeed, access is very important. Access to the Azores is something that everyone is aware of. The SATA, as all of you know, is owned by the government, but the government doesn't really want to be in the airline business. Any government, whether the other one or this one, they would love to sell SATA they'd love to have United Airlines with, flights, every day, or Delta or anybody else. The issue is, how can we fill up planes? Okay, because United or American or Delta or any of the American companies will not do a daily flight, or even a 3 to 4 times a day flight from Boston and once a week from this part of the United States, from San Francisco or Oakland. They won't do a flight unless it's full and it's very, very and it's profitable, obviously. So that's the issue. Trust me, I know Senator Michael Rodriguez has had these talks as well. The Azorean government would not like to be in the airline business. They'd love to get off the airline business today because they lose money with it, and big money. And so they would love to have private industry take over. And I actually think that it might be something that some, folks that are very well in the business people in the Portuguese American community should look into. And that is, do sort of like we had here in California many years ago, which was Sun Trips. It was a local company that did charter service to the Azores. And so we need that. But we do need a bridge, Paulo. That would be a good one. Just like the bridge that connects there, what's it called? The Braga Bridge that connects.
Braga Bridge, yeah.
That's the longest bridge in the world that connects the United States to Ponta Delgada, right? And so it's a standing joke on the East Coast. President Vivian Santos from Terceira. It would be the very first time we'd have a president in the Azores from Terceira.
Well, then there you go. Would it be the first time a female president from the?
Oh yeah, definitely to that too. Although we've had a lady prime minister in Portugal, yes, before.
Right. First off, can you guys hear me now? Because I know the last time I tried speaking. Okay, sorry. Technology. So 2 things that come to mind. One is VAPA, which is Visual and Performing Arts, and someone already mentioned that. But that's just important. I think arts are in our lives every single day. Whether, it be music or film or radio or whatever, paintings. I think that's really important. So having some type of, I don't really know how it would happen, but some type of way where maybe we can study composers that are Azorean, which is, I don't know if you guys heard that part of the last time I spoke, but I talked a little bit about that. And maybe they can even study composers from here that are Portuguese American or Azorean American, and kind of, do that. And you can do that with paintings. So art students, music students, film students, whatever, but having that kind of connection, I think, is important. I think it needs to go beyond just students, though. I think we've talked a lot about education. I'm very passionate about education. Obviously, I'm a teacher. Okay, but and we've talked about these avenues for students to be able to study abroad and go abroad. But how about those who don't want to go to college? And that's okay. My brother is very successful. He makes good money, and he didn't go to college, you know. Same with my husband. He makes as much as I do as a teacher, and he didn't go to college. So how can we get these students who are in like the, or these these people who are in the trades over there, maybe doing some type of internship or something, better access to getting over there? I know, especially over here on the West Coast, because we're not as like condensed as you guys are, I guess, as in the East Coast, or we're not as close. It's a lot more expensive to go over there. It's a lot longer of a trip. It's double the money. It's double the time. So how can we make it more interesting or more accessible for these people, especially here on the West Coast, to get there? To the Azores, some type of program or something. I don't know how it would work, but that's an idea.
Indeed. So I think there's a recurring theme, which is better access to the Azores, obviously for all, and some exchange programs through education, whether it be through the arts, through music, etc. And so lots of different great ideas. Thanks to all of you. I had asked for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. It's been an hour and 45. So I am going to thank you all. Sorry that we took us a little bit longer, but this has been fascinating. Lots of good ideas. By the way, all of your thoughts and all of the different panels that we've had, we are putting together the conclusions, and all of these ideas, all of these action items will be sent actually to the government of the Azores, and it will be also published in the Portuguese press, because we want people to understand that there is a commitment on this part of the world, to continue with the Azorean diaspora, and it's something that is very dear to my heart, because I see we just had a presentation about 4 days ago from a professor at the University of Hawaii, who talked about the integration of the Azorians there and Madeirans. It's basically Portuguese that went to Hawaii were either from the Azores or Madeira, very few from mainland Portugal. There hasn't been any immigration there in 100 years, and other than the malasadas, which is a great thing to have, and they're all over. I mean, it's the only place that you can go everywhere, and those of you who've been to Hawaii know that. You can get the Portuguese donuts, as they call them, there everywhere, and you can get linguiça at McDonald's and all that kind of stuff. But other than some of these iconic foods, the culture has really suffered immensely. And so if we don't take care of it, it will happen to us. It may not be in the next 10 or 15 years. It may be in the next, it won't be for my lifetime, but if we don't take care of it, with all of you who are in your 20s and 30s, it will certainly be in your lifetime. You will see major differences, because I see major differences in the community today from the community that I grew up in 45 years ago. It's totally different. So it's, but we've got some great ideas. All of these will be part of the program that we'll be sending to the Azores written. And thank you again all very much. If there are any other final thoughts, I'll be more than happy to hear them from you. If not, thank you again. Yes, sir.
I will say that we went to Maui for our honeymoon in 2009. And when I said I was Azorean Portuguese, the love I got saying that, just because I was called an island brother, because we were from a different island, but they was called island brother. So I'm like, okay. And this is why I still wear the hook to this day, was because of the way we were treated so very nicely by the locals who lived there in that time.
But it's sad to see that some of the other cultural things that we take for granted in California and Massachusetts and in Rhode Island and Connecticut and some of the other states, some of these things that we take for granted have long gone, have disappeared, and they were present of the Hawaiian community, but they have disappeared. So let's not take anything for granted. And with young, successful, bright young people like all of you, I think that the community has a good future. And I'll be more than happy to work with you. I'm older, yes, I am. I'm of the old generation, but I have this wonderful thing. I've never been president of any festa, so I'm not I don't have any power to hold on to. So I want you in there to take over and do all of those events that we must do as a community, and it must be up to your generation. So continue doing the work you do. Thanks for all you do within American mainstream. whether it be Taylor's comedy or Vivian's, teaching, or whatever it is in the mainstream society that you do, whatever you do, if you can bring Azorianness to whatever you do in your profession, I mean, we're halfway there. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Take care. It was a pleasure. It's mine. It's mine. In São Jorge, no way. Thank you all. Take care. Good night. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Borges.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.